What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Fight Scene. On this channel, we unpack things that are happening in the world of MMA and combat sports. My name's Drew, and today I want to talk a little bit about the fight that's happening between Francis Ngannou and Derek Lewis at UFC 226 on July 7th in Las Vegas. I am super excited for this fight and this card. UFC 226, in my opinion, is one of the best pay-per-views that the UFC has ever put on. In my personal opinion, my favorite, I think the top 3 or top 2 cards ever are UFC 189 and also UFC 205. I think those are two of the best ever. UFC 100 obviously being up there as well. But for me, UFC 226 really is up there and one of the best cards the UFC has ever put on. And it's easily the best UFC pay-per-view that they've done this year. It's part of International Fight Week, so there's a lot of build-up for the card, and I'll make a full video on the UFC 226 card as a whole, but today I want to focus on just one of the fights, and I'll make a number of videos for each one of the fights as well, and this will be my first video in that series. So today we're going to talk about Derek Lewis versus Francis Ngannou. To be honest with you, I mean, I think this was obviously the fight that the UFC, I don't know that they had to make, but certainly it's the fight that the fans wanted after Francis's loss to Stipe. And Derek Lewis is a fun, exciting guy. He's got a massive fan base. Francis Ngannou, you know, the scary wrecking machine that was derailed in his title shot, and people wanted to see it. It was a natural fight to make after Francis's loss to Stipe, and so I'm glad that they sort of listened, or at least felt the pulse of what was happening in the community, and they actually made this fight. And you know, that can actually be pretty rare sometimes, that the fight timing is right and the two fighters that we want to fight each other are happening. It's happening at the right time in the right place, and all those things line up. The stars line up for this fight to happen, so I'm super excited for it to happen. At the same time, I'm a little hesitant because sometimes when you get really excited for a fight, it ends up being not the greatest contest in the world. And I think a really good example of that recently was Wonderboy Thompson versus Darren Till. On paper, that fight is everything you would want in a mixed martial arts contest. In reality, wasn't the most exciting fight we've ever seen. And so I remain slightly hesitant that this fight won't be so great. Sometimes that does happen with heavyweight fighters. Of all the divisions, heavyweight fights are the most polarizing. They can be the most exciting fights you've ever seen because they're heavyweights and they have obvious stopping power, but at the same time they can be kind of lackluster because they're more prone to gassing out, and it kind of be my one friend and I call it a whale flopper, where it's two guys who maybe their physiques aren't the same as the other divisions, their cardio is definitely not the same as the other divisions, and they're just sort of swinging for the fences and not looking super great. So there is the potential that this fight, while on paper it's one of the best fights they can make, it could end up being a fairly lackluster contest. So this one's really tough for me to call, and it's not. I think I'll still make a prediction on it because that's what I do on these videos. But at the same time, this is a tough fight to call, because what we'd have is Francis Ngannou kind of coming off not just a loss to Stipe, but I don't necessarily like using the term exposed very often, but if ever there was a fighter that was sort of exposed as being overhyped, it was probably Francis Ngannou after his loss. He had so much hype behind him. The UFC had put all of their promotion behind him to even be the next champion. And Stipe kind of made short work of him, using wrestling and just showing that Francis doesn't have the cardio or the wrestling ability to be a champion at this time in his career. Maybe he'll work on that, I'm not sure. But Francis is sort of coming off of that loss, I think, looking to establish himself as a true top contender and not just this flash in the pan guy who got his 15 minutes of fame and then will sort of fizzle out because it turns out maybe he's not a top tier fighter. So Francis has got a lot to prove in this fight. Derek Lewis, not so much. I mean, I think people kind of know who Derek Lewis is. He seems like a fairly, I don't know if fun loving is the right term, but this sort of casual guy who just likes to go in there and fight. I think most people know that he's never really going to be champion and that he's not, you know, a top 5 heavyweight, but at the same time he's a fan favorite because he's exciting to watch. His fights are usually pretty good and he's such a character, and so people enjoy watching him. So this fight's really good for that reason. And who, I'm not saying that Derek Lewis doesn't have a chance in this fight. I think he absolutely does have a chance in this fight. I think he's got a very real chance in this fight, which would be pretty devastating for Francis Ngannou's career, I think, at this point. For both of these fighters, they do have a lot to prove to show, what is their actual level, or what is their actual position in the heavyweight division. Are they top contenders, or are they just sort of fun guys to watch? In the case of Derek Lewis, maybe that's more the case than it is Francis, but we'll certainly know after the end of this fight. So because this fight is actually really hard to pick, I just went straight to the stats on this card. I don't normally look too much at stats or judge too much off of stats, but for this one, I wanted to really see what do these fighters look like on paper. And so you have Derek Lewis, who is definitely the more experienced fighter at this point, with a record of 25-5. 17 wins of his are by knockout, and he has 3 losses by knockout, which I think is important to note. And as well, he's 6'3", so he's a big guy. Obviously, he carries a really big frame, and we saw that kind of come into play, just his sheer brute strength in the Roy Nelson fight, where he didn't even really use a lot of technique to get up off the ground. He basically, when he wanted to stand up, he did. And so that's Derek Lewis. For Francis Ngannou, he is 13-2. with 11 of his wins coming by knockout. And both of his losses, and this is really important to note, I think, that both of his losses were by decision. And in fact, they're the only two decisions that Francis Ngannou's ever been to. So so far on his record, any time that he goes to the decision, he's losing, which I think is an important thing to note here. There's no odds on this fight. I tried to look online at this time in the video, because we are about a month away from the fight. There are no Vegas odds on who's going to win, but my guess would be that, or at least what the betting lines are looking like. I'm not a betting guy, and so I pay attention to the odds a little bit, but you guys have been sort of informing me through the videos of how the odds are made, so I don't want to put too much stock into them. My guess is that my guess is that Francis Ngannou will open as the favorite, but there is this fight is a bit of a coin flip for me, because we don't know if Francis Ngannou's cardio is up to task to go 3 rounds. And we see that by those decision losses, I think. Yes, he had a fairly grueling fight against Curtis Blades, and he did last the whole 25 minutes against Stipe Miocic, but he definitely gassed after the sort of first or second round there, and his cardio left a little bit to be desired. On the other hand, you have Derek Lewis, who, while his physique might not imply it, we've seen him go to decision a couple of times, and yeah, he looks really tired, but his performance doesn't sort of drastically decline at the same rapid rate that we saw Francis's decline at. And so I do think if this fight goes to the decision, that potentially could favor Derek Lewis. Not to say that Francis can't continue to really tee off on a guy and win by decision, but my guess is that if this fight were to go to decision, that's favoring Derek Lewis, that he's been able to withstand the power of Francis Ngannou, and as well, he's probably been able to bully him a little bit, potentially even on the ground. I recently saw a video, as I was kind of preparing for this video, that Francis Ngannou has been training a little bit more ground game, and my guess is because it was such an obvious weakness for him in the last fight. And I want to be respectful, but it was really bad. You could probably take a look on it. It's on YouTube, and it's him sort of playing guard with a guy, and he's sort of setting up an armbar. And I'm not a black belt. I'm not even close to a good jiu-jitsu practitioner, to be honest with you, but you can see that he's not really executing the armbar properly, and then he just literally bucks the guy off and kind of rolls them over in a way that not only is it not ever really going to work in the UFC, but it's definitely not going to work against a guy like Derek Lewis, as big as he is and as good as he is at pressure. And so if this fight were to go to the ground, I probably would actually favor Derek Lewis. Both of these guys are terrible at wrestling. Both of these guys they don't really train wrestling. I shouldn't say that they're terrible at wrestling. They admittedly don't train wrestling, and we haven't seen a lot from them in regards to jiu-jitsu, because it's not really their thing, right? These guys like to stand and slug it out, for lack of better terms. There's more technical things happening, specifically on the end of Francis Ngannou, but if this fight were to go to the ground, and gosh, I hope it doesn't, that would be a real letdown, I think, as far as the fans want to see these guys just stand and fight. But if it did go to the ground, I'd probably give a bit of an advantage to Derek Lewis because we saw him have some sort of ground skills against Roy Nelson, who is no joke on the ground. So that's important to notice. I typically like to talk about keys for victory for each fighter, but in this fight, there are so many unknowns, and we basically know what we're getting here, which is two fighters that are going to go out there and really just trying to punch each other in the face. I don't know that there's going to be a lot of kicks thrown. Certainly, Derek Lewis, I don't think he's not a big kicker. And so we kind of know what we're getting here, which is a bit of a spectacle fight, which I'm totally fine with. I'm super excited for it. So while I would normally talk about keys to victory, I kind of just have three things that I've noted here that I think apply to both fighters. So normally I would give it for each fighter, but I think that this applies to both fighters. For starters, they both really need to be careful about their defense. Both these guys have knockout power, and so in order to win the fight, whatever fighter is more diligent with being defensive and shows a technical ability to avoid taking shots and block shots, I think that fighter probably takes a lot less damage. They show the wherewithal throughout the fight that they're able to keep up with their ability, if that makes sense. And I think that the fighter that shows the better defense will likely be fresh and coming out on top of the striking exchanges throughout the fight. I also just have here to stay off the ground, please. Please just stay off the ground, because really, if both of these guys can walk away winners if they just put on an exciting fight. That we know, the fans know what this is, and whether it's Derek Lewis or Francis Ngannou, if they go out there and put on a show, they can both walk away as winners. Now, maybe Derek Lewis more so than Francis, because like I said, he does have a little bit more to prove, in my opinion. But really, both these guys can walk away as fighters if they just stay off the ground and make sure that they're not putting on a boring fight because they don't really know a lot of high level. They don't have a lot of ability in regards to jiu-jitsu and wrestling. And then lastly, really simply, I have don't gas out, because both of these fighters have shown that as the fight goes on, their cardio is not at the level as some other fighters in the UFC heavyweight division. And I think where this fight could be a real stinker is if they go out there guns blazing in the first round, neither fighter puts the other one away, and then they just gas, and for 2 rounds, it's just really sloppy, gassed fighters in that sort of whale flopper kind of fight that we've seen a million times before. So both these guys can really, I think this is a coin toss of a fight for the most part. I give the edge to Francis Ngannou a little bit, but that being said, there was a real hype train behind Francis. He did have that amazing knockout over Overeem, but we've seen Overeem get knocked out before. He did have a couple, more than just a few times. He had that really good performance against Andrei Arlovski, who's on the other side of his career, and I feel like Francis has benefited from some good opportunities, and so there's still a lot that's unknown for me. Whereas Derek Lewis, I think we have a good understanding of where he is, and while he does have some losses to somebody like Matt Mitrione, and I think for the most part, actually, he did kind of lose that Roy Nelson fight, in my opinion. I was sort of surprised to see that they gave it to Derek. But we kind of know where he's at. The real question here is, how good really is Francis Ngannou? Could he be a contender again? If he works on his wrestling and cardio, could he take another shot at the title? That's the real question for me in this fight. And so if my feet are to the fire and I need to make a pick, for me, it would likely be Francis Ngannou by TKO or KO. Derek Lewis does have a couple times on his record where he's been knocked out or TKO'd, and so I don't want to say that he has a propensity towards that or that he's vulnerable for that, but we've seen it before against somebody like Mark Hunt, where he just gets super tired and then his defense goes away and he ends up getting knocked out. And so for me, I would probably pick Francis Ngannou by some sort of stoppage. If it does go to decision, then maybe Derek Lewis pulls it away. But if I had to make a bet on this, or I had to make a pick on this, I would give the edge to Francis Ngannou. But I do really, really think that this fight could go either way. I'd be interested to see what the Vegas odds are on this fight. in my opinion, they should be pretty close to even, because it is a lot closer of a fight than it might seem. That just because Francis Ngannou is coming off a title shot doesn't mean that he is that much better than Derek Lewis. And I guess we'll find out on July 7th. So thank you so much for watching. Let me know who you think wins this fight in the comment section below. Keep an eye out for my future videos on this pay-per-view. I'm going to make a number of videos for each fight. Michael Chiesa versus Anthony Pettis, Brian Ortega versus Max Holloway, Stipe Miocic versus Daniel Cormier. I just love this card. I think it's so good. I think it's among the highest levels of MMA, and I'm super excited for July 7th. So keep an eye out for those videos, and I'll see you in those videos. Hey, thank you so much for watching this video. I really appreciate you taking some time out of your day to watch this content. I'm just a fan with an opinion and a camera, but I love the sport of MMA. So if you want to see some more videos, you can take a look here on the right of this screen. And other than that, I will catch you in the next video.